First question we're going to ask, though, that we haven't addressed. Lately, we've had a lot of civil rights issues come to the forefront over the last few years. We had the Arizona law that was ultimately struck down, but that caused an uproar. Looking at your biography, we had the DOMA legislation that certainly was something that is near and dear to causes that you have dedicated a lot of your time to. Within the last week, we had the shooting in Ferguson County. Again, not jumping to any conclusions, but it does bring civil rights issues to the tip of everyone's tongue yet again. What ideas do you have, assuming you're reelected and go back up to Carson, to perhaps try and institute some proactive measures to try and get ahead of these problems, as opposed to just waiting until a situation arises and then have everyone react and having things sometimes spiral out of control?
Well, thank you again, everybody, for allowing me the opportunity to be here today with you. In regards to that question, we have seen our fair share of unrest recently with some of the shootings that have taken place here. Justified or not, it still causes a community to go to the streets or become upset or become engaged. I think that with the upcoming session, we'll have a new sheriff in town, pardon the pun, but that I think will be very important. We have tried, I can say from this last session, to have a very close relationship with law enforcement in our state, whether it's NHP, whether it be Metro, whether it be North Las Vegas, Henderson, Washoe County sheriffs, any of those type, that we try and work very closely with them and understand what their needs are. I think a lot of what is so critical to keeping peace in a community is the outreach piece of law enforcement. Unfortunately, due to budgetary constraints and the way that the current sheriff has his budget and has had the situations that he's had in terms of people leaving, economic downturn, and the way that he receives his revenue, we have seen a huge decrease in the number of officers on our streets. I was a big part of the More Cops bill that ultimately went into special session. I literally ran down the hallway with the bill seconds before the clock struck midnight. We almost made it, but couldn't get it transferred over to the Senate in time. But I strongly believe that the voters spoke back in 2005 and said, we are a growing community. We need and want more officers on our streets to ensure that we are safe. We also have a very anomaly here in Southern Nevada particularly, and that's our tourism industry. And that we must protect that strip and downtown area. We must not allow for a reputation of an unsafe city, because if it does, it will kill jobs. It will kill jobs in our number one industry, and we cannot allow that to happen. We saw it even with the shooting on the Strip, which ultimately ended in the fiery crash there in front of Bellagio, and the ripple effect, how it got picked up on CNN and everything very quickly. So it is very important that we put more officers on the street so that there could be more of a proactive approach to community law enforcement versus a reactionary approach. Reactionary approach tends to get us what we see, unrest, because there's nobody out there trying to stop these things from happening before they do. They just have to react once they do happen, because that's all the resources that we currently have. And so I think from a legislative perspective, we need to do everything that we can to work very closely with all our law enforcement agencies, including our federal agencies, FBI, CIA, everything that goes into Homeland Security. I've been fortunate enough to be assigned as a commissioner to Homeland Security here in the state of Nevada, and take that role very personally, because particularly for our industry and the number of my constituents in District 35 that work and rely on the tourism industry to provide for their families, and that's why I really feel that I bring something different to the legislature, and that is I'm the only one that's in gaming or hospitality currently working in it and serving in the legislature. And being that that's the number one industry, the number one taxpayer, number one employer in our state, I take that as a huge responsibility in order to make sure that anything that we're looking at, how does that affect all of those employees and families that make up our hospitality industry.
Joe, you were going to ask a question. I'm gonna let you do it right now. Go for it. I'm going to encourage you to do it, not let.
How do you
Encourage.
feel about the margins tax?
Margins tax, any tax, and this has been my position on taxes in general. Taxes should be something that truly bring a benefit to the community. We know that's the only way that the government has to fund and have revenue is through taxes and fees. But we are in a state, and I learned through my first session, that we have taxes that just don't make any sense, and we have the need for some different taxes. I am one about equality. I believe that taxation should be about equality, and it shouldn't be singling out any one industry, any one segment. It should be, if we're looking at a business tax, it should be across the board, so that you don't have small businesses paying all of these taxes and you have big business not paying taxes or business taxes in our state. That's just not right. Everybody, if they're going to do business, if they're going to profit off of our constituents, then they should be investing in the community in which our constituents live. That's how I look at things. And so I think it needs a big table. I think we need to throw out all taxes, and we need both parties, both houses in the room, and we need to have the conversation and say, does this tax make any sense anymore? 50 years, 60 years when this tax was implemented, it did make sense. But we are a new state now. We're very different than what we were back then. And there's still a lot of taxes, laws on the books that just don't make any sense anymore. And there's maybe some needs for other ones. So when I look at taxes and when I look at question 3 in the TI, it concerns me because, I think we should have handled this in the legislature. It concerns me greatly that it's going to the vote of the people, because people don't have time in their lives to research things as important as this. But the impact that all of us as a community will have to live with, whether it passes or whether it fails, it's critical. And so there's still several questions on the margins tax that concern me. When I talk to small businesses, I'm very alarmed. When I talk to big business, I'm alarmed of what information they provide me. There's no doubt education has to be funded better in our state. And it's our responsibility in the legislature to find new sustainable sources of revenue. And I think that we can. I think we were close. I believe that when I talk to business owners now, and I say, obviously you don't want this, what's the solution then? What would you propose? I believe that if this were to fail, that we will be able to bring business to the table and say, what can we work out that is a win-win? Nobody likes to pay more, but we know we have to. So business taxes structure in general in Nevada is so low that there's things that we need to potentially adjust. But I'm not saying let's open the floodgates on taxes either. I'm saying we need to very carefully look at taxes and say what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. What's a win-win for our community? Businesses may end up paying more, but they're going to get more educated workforce because we're going to have a stronger system. So it is a win-win if we can find where that is. Is a gross margins tax the best way to do it? I'm concerned about that. I'm really concerned about that based on my conversation with business owners. And when I talk to people who say, well, but education, how can you say it? I'm not saying that. I'm saying, just like any piece of legislation, if the wording is not right, it's very dangerous. And the impact can be catastrophic to a community. And we are a community that's on the mend. We are moving forward as a community. We are strengthening as a community. And why would we want to do something that is going to take us backwards again and potentially close businesses and potentially put people out of jobs? That concerns me. And so as it's not in my hands anyways, it's in the hands of voters, when I talk to constituents, I say, please look at that carefully and make sure that the vote that you cast really represents how you feel and how you really want. And I use the education bond initiative and the failure of that initiative as a great example. Because when I talked to my constituents, they did not realize, of course it's too late now, that that bond measure was for capital improvements. It was not for teachers, not for administrative salaries, not for these fees or these things that my constituents are concerned how the district spends their money. And my district has one of the highest overcrowding problems in our district. And it's a tough thing when I look at my constituents. They say, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, had we passed that, there was a lot I could have done. Because we could have lobbied to make sure that the schools that we have already have land for in District 35 would have been built and would have been underway now. And we would have had some light, particularly considering all the construction and the boom we're seeing in District 35 right now. I toured with the home builders president, and it's just fantastic in the sense that these communities are finally being, and Joe, you're in Mountain's Edge, and finally being able to see these communities finished. So when residents drive home, they're not driving through a half run-down construction zone. They're going to have a complete neighborhood now, and that's fantastic. But the flip side is there's a lot of families coming into Mountain's Edge and Southern Highlands right now. Where are we going to put all the kids? That's a huge concern that I have.
I have a question.
You said something about the reevaluation of the taxing system, the taxes, right?
Yes.
How realistic is that, to really sit down and reevaluate what works and what doesn't work? Or is it just a goal, or is it something you can put in order?
I think it's both. I think we need to have a goal, and now I think we need to take action to accomplish that. And why I'm optimistic about that is because of the tone that we had in the last legislative session. Even though we had a huge distraction with the first 60 days with former Assemblyman Brooks, the tempo that the Speaker was able to set in the Assembly, and I'll only speak for the Assembly side, was very optimistic in terms, she really pulled both sides together to have conversations. You know, the fact that we were able to advance on education as much as we had, or as much as we did, is very optimistic in my opinion. It shows me that for the first time, probably forever, that the legislature understands how important the priority of education must be in our state. Both parties sat down together, both houses sat down together, and the governor. And we put and invested more money into education than we ever had. Now, it's just a drop in the bucket, we know that. But it tells me we're moving in the right direction. It tells me that everybody understands how important it is, and that education has to be the link to everything we touch. Whether it's economic development, whether it's healthcare, you know, it all hits education. And because education is, in my opinion, the foundation of our community. If we have an educated community, we have a lot less strain on our systems, and a lot less people that don't work and need public assistance. And then we have qualified people so businesses can grow and don't have to go to the outside and spend so much money to recruit out of state. No, they can recruit right here and put the people who live in Southern Nevada, or in Nevada in general, put the people who live in Nevada back to work, or keep them at work.
How optimistic are you that revisiting the funding formula, which has been, I think we heard today, been the same since 1967 or something thereabouts, how optimistic are you that that's going to be appropriately addressed?
I feel very optimistic because I'm sure you're aware that through the interim we have had the Southern Nevada delegation active, very active. And that was started by the Speaker right before session started. And we all, as a community, some of you I think are part of that, came to that first meeting at UNLV. And subsequently, since session has ended, we have been a part of all of these different committees, subcommittees of the delegation. The education funding formula has been one of those hot topics that have really been, they have dived into or delved into that so deep now. The conversations are there. The fact that Southern Nevada is so united is really optimistic. That makes me feel good that I think that UNLV and our other universities down south are going to be finally heard and taken into consideration in order to make that funding formula better. And I'm optimistic that we'll get there. Just because there's been so much focus on it, versus just a conversation saying, well, when we get to the session, we'll deal with it. You know, and I think that was really what a lot of these issues were in previous sessions. We'll deal with them when we get there. We don't have time to deal with them when we get there. We got to deal with them now and be prepared to just move it when we get to session. And that's the speaker's goal. You know, she wants from the Southern Nevada delegation for us here in Southern Nevada to walk into the first day of session and start hearings on these bills that we as a coalition, if you would, have come together in order to say in a bipartisan way, this is really important for Southern Nevada and let's get it done. And that we pass these bills in the first 60 days of session. Then we'll get to the fundamentals of some of the tougher discussions that will always take us to the last day of session.
So you guys get the big bucks, right?
Absolutely.
Does the state assembly, do you guys get together here locally to have meetings and discuss things and work things out before you go up north?
Well, we have the Southern Nevada delegation, so that is everybody coming together. So not just the legislature, not just the assembly. It's business leaders, education leaders, healthcare leaders, all of those that have been a part of this process so that we can be ready. And we're using a lot of what we're doing in those subcommittees to submit our BDR requests. And so are there official meetings? No, of course there can't be any, and there can be no decisions in terms of you know, we obviously can't pass anything when we're not in session. But the legwork of what needs to happen in order to have a productive session is what we're doing now.
Because we do have the majority here, anyway. 2/3 of it's over here. So.
Correct, but you still can't take any action.
Yeah.
But for the first time, Southern Nevada has come together to say, let's make sure we protect Southern Nevadans and let's make sure we're getting our fair share of resources instead of saying the North kind of takes it all the time. Not anymore. Status quo. You know, they're used to that. Anytime you get used to something, why would you want it to go away?
And when it benefits you.
When it benefits you, right? And of course it is their job to fight for their constituents to keep it that way. But it's about time that the South come together and be united to say, look, let's really work harder to make sure we get our fair share.
Are all the assembly or Senate people in the delegation, in the group?
The Southern Nevada
Southern
Coalition.
Nevada
Kevin, I'm a member of 2 committees there. So it's not just the assembly people, but also private citizens.
I mean, also the Senate.
Yes,
Yeah.
both houses are there.
Everybody.
Everybody is at the table, and it also includes all local government jurisdictions. So the mayor's office is the commissioners are on the committee. The mayor herself for Las Vegas is there. Mayor for North Las Vegas, mayor for Henderson. They're all a part of it. So
So
that's
North
why
have
it's
to
exciting.
listen, right? Otherwise, we will send our cavalry.
Well, the North has had the cavalry for a long time, and now
yeah.
it's our turn to finally have sending it in.
Yeah.